Hi everybody and welcome back. In this video we are going to learn about some different types of loops in programming. Loops are very powerful items and used for a variety of purposes. So come over to Server Script Service and we'll create a script and we'll call this our loops script. Get rid of our hello world statement inside and we'll just put a comment up the top here. Types of loops. Alright, so to begin with, we'll create a variable and we'll call it the goal, and we'll set this to 10. This is going to represent how many times the loop is going to run before it stops. Alright, so how many times the loop runs. So we're going to talk about a couple of different loops and how to use them. So there are lots of ways to use loops in programming, and the purpose of this video is really to show you how to create them and see how they run. And once we get into the project at the end of the course, you will see how I use loops in different ways to achieve different goals. So the first one that we're going to look at is the for loop. Now, the for loop has three different parts to it. Okay, so the first part is the keyword for. Then we follow this with, we're going to put I here. Now, I could be anything. I could put here dog or whatever I like in there, like a variable name. But usually I, it's referred to, so put in here, I equals an iterator. So iterator, you can think of that like a counter. Okay, and initially we're going to set I equal to 1, so the loop is going to start at 1. Then we put a comma, and the second part of the loop is what's the goal, or where do we want to count up to, and we created the variable up above, so the goal. Alright, so the goal will be how many times yeah, well, it's the same as up the top there, how many times the loop runs. And the last part, which is optional, is the increment. So when we put a 1 at the end of this, it means we're going to count up in ones. So 1 equals the increment. So each time the loop runs, I is going to be increased by this number. So the first time the loop runs through, it will be 1, the next time it will be 2, 3, etc., until it gets to whatever the number is here. Now we could have just put 10 in here or 5 or whatever, but we're using a variable to represent the goal in here. To finish our loop, we add the word do and hit enter. And that's the construction of your loop. Now this increment at the end here is optional. By default, it will always count up by 1. So a shortcutted version is to simply do this, and it will work exactly the same way. But just since we're learning about loops, we'll keep the increment in there for the time being. Now to get some sort of output, we can simply put in here print, and we'll put in here I. So we're going to print the value of I. So the first time it runs through, I will be 1. And then it'll get to end, it'll come up here, increase I to 2, and then print. So let's run it and see what happens. And you can see the numbers print out 1 through to 10, because we're printing out the iterator to the output window. Alright, so that's our first simple loop. Now, we'll just comment this print statement out and leave that there, and we'll move this down below. Now for loops can also be used to count down instead of up. So the way that we might go about doing that is to say for and say I equals, and this time we're going to say I will be equal to 10, and the goal in this case will be we're going to count down to 0, and the increment will be -1. So in this case, the loop will run around, starting at 10, and then as it counts down, it'll take 1 off the goal, which will be 9, etc. And to slow the loop down a bit, we can add in a task.wait of 1 second. So task.wait will pause the script for 1 second before it moves on to this next line, which, let's say we're going to fly a rocket, and we can say take off in and put a space. We'll put a comma here. We can print 2 items at once, and we'll put I in here. All right. Now this will be the takeoff, and just below this, this code will not run until the loop is completed. And we're going to put here print and take off. Alright, so this is an important thing to realize about loops, is that the script, when it runs, will start at the top, get down to here, and then it will go round and round and round until all of its loops are finished before it moves on to the next line of code below. Alright, so let's run this and see what happens. And you'll see 10, so every second it's counting down. Alright, 3, 2, 1, and then take off. It got to 0, and then it ran the code at the end. Alright, so that's a good thing to realize, that code coming after a loop won't run until the loop is finished. Alright, so that's counting up and down with our for loops. So now we'll just move this all down a little bit, and we're going to look at a different kind of loop. Alright, this one is called a while loop. And I'm going to put a big disclaimer here in capital letters, danger, alright, with an exclamation mark. Do not, and I'll even put in here not, okay, run a while loop with or without a wait of some kind within the loop. Alright, and the reason, you could crash your computer. So we'll write the loop, and then I'll explain a little bit more about the chaos that's going on there. So the way we write a while loop is to say while, and then we're going to use the goal up above, right, is greater than 0, then this loop, whoops, sorry, it's just do there, and we'll just spread that out a little bit. Okay, and inside of here we're going to put in print. The goal is now, and we'll print out the goal, but now we will reduce the goal ourselves. So there's 2 ways to write this. So we can say the goal equals the goal minus 1. All right, so it's taking this item here and then taking 1 away and then assigning it back to the variable. So this would be 9 and then 8, etc. However, there's a shortcut way to write this. All right, and if we just take this out, we can say minus equals 1. All right, so that means exactly the same thing. All right, same as the goal equals the goal minus 1. All right, but this is a much shorter way to write it. Okay, and as I said just up above, we want to write task.wait, and we'll say for half a second in here. All right, and after this while loop, this code will run when the condition in the while loop is no longer true. So remember, we talked about conditional statements. So we can say now this code will run. So we put a condition in our while loop. So every time the loop runs around, it's going to check the goal, is it greater than 0? And if it is, it will run all the code in here, and then it'll come back up here and it'll continue. Now, as I said earlier, while loops can be used to run endless loops, so we don't have to actually end the loop. We could just have this running round and round and round forever, which you may think, well, why would I want to do that? And it's a very good way of managing time-based games where you want to move players into a game or back into a lobby, so that there is a continuous process running. But for this purpose, we're going to make it end. Now, as I said, if you run this without a wait, then it becomes an endless loop, but it doesn't slow down, and it just overwhelms your computer, and it can crash the program and your entire computer, where you have to turn it off and turn it back on again. So I'm not going to do that, and I don't advise that you do either. But I mean, if curiosity gets the better of you, give it a go. But just be warned that this could happen, and probably will. All right. So let's run the code and see what happens. So goal is now getting down to 1. This code will run. And now you'll notice takeoff in 0. Our code below here didn't run anymore because we'd already used up the goal. If you wanted to continue to have this, we could reset the variable by simply saying the goal equals, and we can set it back to 10 after this loop up above has finished running. Alright, so that's our while loop that comes to an end. Okay, so now, like I said, we can have while loops that will, there's other ways of breaking the while loop as well. So let's have a look at those. Alright, so in this case, we'll create a variable here called count. And we're just going to put in here while true, do. So remember conditional statements if true, so this is always true, so it's always going to run. And in here we're just going to put in here print just waiting. And then we will increase count by 1, so count plus equals 1, so count will count up, and then we're going to put in a conditional statement. So if count, all right, is greater than or equal to 100, then we're going to break the while loop, and we simply type in the word break. All right, so this keyword will break the loop that it's in. Okay, so when count gets up, and just down below here we're going to put in a task.wait with nothing inside. So this will count up very quickly before moving on. So when this loop has broken, then this code will run underneath. So let's run that, and you'll see waiting, and then it continued on. Okay, so it went up to 100 very quickly before moving on to the rest of our code below. Alright, so we have one more loop that I'd like to have a look at. So we'll come up to the top here and just drop down a couple of lines. And this one is similar to a while loop, so that it's called a repeat until loop. Now, it's very similar to a while loop in that it needs to have some sort of wait inserted into it, because it can also break your computer. But the way we write this is we can say repeat and then enter, and you get the until. So what's going to happen is this code in here will run at least once. Then it will test the condition at the end. So down below here, our while condition here is being tested before the code runs. So this is a loop that lets you run the code in here at least once to make sure that before it repeats. Now we need to have a condition here to meet. So we'll create a new variable up the top, and we'll just call that this number. All right, and we'll say 5. Excuse me. So the condition that we're going to put here will be until the goal equals this number. And inside of our loop, we'll start off with a task.wait of say half a second, and we'll print the goal, all right, equals, and put in here the goal. Then we'll take one away from the goal in here, and when this loop has finished, we can print in here the goal and this number equals, and we'll just say the goal, right? Because they should be equal when this runs. So this will run through at least once, then check the condition, then run round and round until this condition is met. So it's important when you have these that the code is actually able to meet the condition that you put in here, otherwise it will just continue to go round and round and round and round. All right, so let's play. So the goal, counting down, and it got to the goal and the number are equal to 5, and then it's run on to the rest of our code. All right, so that's how we can use our repeat loops. Now, like I said, if this never got to be equal, so let's say we took away 3, now you'll see the loop, the condition has never been met. So the first repeat loop is now just running away endlessly, and it will continue just to run and run and run and run forever because we didn't put in any condition to break that loop. All right, so that is the basics of using loops. So I hope you got a little bit out of that, and we in the next lesson, we're going to look a little bit closer at tables. As I said, a data type, and they are a very useful object. So I will see you in that lesson.